all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Double Feature Podcast. And I'm your host on this brain dead weekend, Dean, joined by the zombified master of suspense, David. David, how are you doing?
I'm feeling pretty undead, Dean.
Pretty undead? I wonder if that's related to the movies we're watching this week. By the way, what are we watching this week?
Well, what we are watching this week is another installment of our Halloween horror episode month. And this week we're going to be focusing on zombie movies, one of many favorites of the genre that people have. But we're going to be focusing on two that kind of make fun of the genre in a few different ways. We're going to be visiting Shaun of the Dead and Dawn of the Dead.
Now, I know you're not really a big fan of zombie movies, right?
Yeah, but I almost think that's why I liked this pairing a bit more because, first of all, I'm a fan of Edgar Wright. You gotta love him. He's one of the greatest directors doing it right now. And then George A. Romero's Dawn of the Dead was a little bit like he himself knew how to transform the genre.
I mean, he
even though he was the guy who made
basically created it
first. Yeah, and it's like you'd think that he would want to stick to the building blocks of what he made, but no, he just decided to go full ham. Like, let's start making fun of it. Let's start parodying it. Let's start transforming it. Let's do this.
It's kind of interesting when we get into Dawn of the Dead, because Dawn of the Dead really does feel like it's completely aware of what like the zombie genre is, and just
absolutely
kind of pokes all kinds of weird shit into it. But before we get into that, David, what are the elevator pitches for these movies? What are these movies about?
Right, so the log lines for these movies are: a boyish couch potato takes hold of his life when he saves his ex-girlfriend from danger during an apocalyptic zombie outbreak.
Oh, is that Dawn of the Dead or Shaun of the Dead?
Shaun of the Dead, and that's Dawn of the Dead being four survivors of the zombie pandemic find shelter in a shopping mall. That's it.
That's the movie?
Pretty much the whole movie.
All right.
Yeah, but there's more there. There's definitely more there to that. So.
All right. Well,
why don't we find out? Which one would you like to discuss first, Dean?
Honestly, I kind of want to talk about Shaun of the Dead because, if I'm being honest, that was the one I watched first.
That was actually the one I watched first. Perfect.
All right. So, first off, when was the first time you saw Shaun of the Dead, and when was the last time you watched it?
Well, obviously, last time I watched it was this week.
I mean, before this week. You know what I mean.
I don't think I'd seen it for a couple years before this. I've watched a few different Edgar Wright films over the years as rewatches and newer films. Obviously, Baby Driver has been a hot topic lately. I watched Hot Fuzz last year, actually, which was the film that came out right before this.
Right after. Shaun of the Dead was the first one in the quote-unquote Cornetto trilogy, which was the thematic trilogy that everybody subscribed it to afterwards. Yeah,
right.
Because it's...
And... like the first time I saw Shaun of the Dead, my sister's boyfriend, now husband actually,
congrats.
It's one of his favorite movies, so I feel like I had seen it at some point because he forced me to watch it. I just can't remember what age it was because I've seen this movie a few different times, and it's one of my favorites that Wright has done because of how creative it is. Similarly to Hot Fuzz.
Okay. My guess is like the last time I watched this was probably like 7 years ago. Basically, whenever The World's End came out, that was the last time I watched Shaun of the Dead. And I remember first time I watched it before that was like when it came out, maybe. Like, because I have the old school like DVD copy from when it first like dropped over here. But like, I'm pretty sure my sister bought that because she thought it was funny. And that's like why I watched it. So whenever year it came out, I think it was 2004 when this movie came out. That was the first time I watched it, and I stopped watching it like almost a decade ago. But yeah, still a fun movie. I remember enjoying it a lot. I remember quoting it a lot. But when I watched it this time, it's kind of weird because I almost expected it to not hold up at all, and it really exceeded my expectation. The movie is still actually very good.
Oh yeah, because I think part of that has to do with the fact that this isn't one of the run-of-the-mill comedies that you would have find in 2009. I believe this is when it came out.
This came out in 2000. Wait, did this actually come out in 2009? No, this came out in 2004.
Was it?
Yeah, dude, this is 2004.
No way.
100.
Oh,
Yeah,
shit.
yeah, it's 2004.
Why did I
David's
think
having
it
a
was 2009?
fucking moment right now.
Okay, well, either way, this is it's. I mean, like I said, it's still kind of different from a lot of the other comedies that were coming out in 2004. I mean,
Most definitely.
a lot of things at that point were, if you were watching a comedy back then, it was pretty much just about normal adult life. You think of things from that era being like the 40-Year-Old Virgin.
Well, actually, this was like almost prime like scary movie territory, right?
Yeah, Scary Movie had started coming out in I think 2000 or 2001
Something
was
like that, yeah.
the initial release of that. So they had to have been at like the third or fourth installment already. I mean, maybe that it was between 2 and 3 probably.
Hmm.
But even then, it's like you didn't really have a whole lot of like parody style movies that I can think of at that moment.
Yeah, would you even call this a parody movie or more like a satire kind of movie?
Um,
Because it
I
is a
guess
comedy. It's a zombie movie, and it kind of pokes fun at it, but it's not like a what parody movies turned into with like the scary movie genre.
I think there's an element of parody in it because even Scary Movie uses elements of horror still to keep your attention. At a younger age, especially Scary Movie, the series, kind of scared me as a kid as much as it was funny because they use a lot of that horror to their advantage of like creating comedic moments out of it. And I think the movie does the same in that we get a lot of these shots in the background in the setup of the movie of like things that are related to normal life, but then you also can't tell if it is a zombie moment, and you're kind of in the mind of Simon Pegg at the moment, like not sure of what's going on and kind of noticing that everybody's zombified.
This movie is amazing at background information because
Oh
there's
yeah, yeah.
so much stuff going on in the background of every shot of this movie. It's ridiculous.
Wright really does a good job at always using the entirety of the environment on set. And I think that he also did that to kind of transform a little bit the genre itself. Horror is also it's a little bit of a horror trope to like put scares in the background at first for people to notice, and then it kind of comes to the foreground once the scare happens. A recent example of that, I guess you could say, is from It, the remake. There were a lot of moments like that.
Oh, where Pennywise is in the background of like half the movie and no one noticed.
Yeah, or like in the library when the librarian's standing there, things like that, And I feel like that's a little bit what was going on, but I also Wright uses a lot of them comedically, and I really enjoy that. I really enjoy like the other things he transforms, like the news information coming over a news broadcast sequence when he's like changing the channels and like the full like
Oh
description of the
God,
zombie. That's a
that is
brilliant way to transform that cliche.
that is like the best gag in the movie. It is
Yeah,
so good, and it's such like a simple like editing thing you can do. It seems like something that wouldn't even be like that hard to pull off in like a student film, but it's just like perfect in this movie.
yeah. It's funny that you bring up student films because I feel like Wright is a little bit of this class of, I don't want to say film school brat part two, but there were a lot of these filmmakers. Ryan Johnson is one we've talked about before. Wright is included with this. I guess you could also label maybe a Damien Chazelle in this class of younger directors that are doing their thing nowadays that got their kicks from like low budget student filmmaking. Yeah, if you go back and watch one of Ryan Johnson's shorts, it's brilliant because he does this story about um, like a golf ball that a guy takes from a house that he robs and then kills the owner.
Mhm.
And the golf ball like terrorizes him, and it's almost like a symbol for guilt a little bit, but it's such like a simple trick to make the movie totally exciting and interesting. And Wright also similarly has this little short I think everybody knows where it's like people are like about to have this shootout in an alley, but it's just like a finger gun fight that he puts in slow-mo, and it's totally hilarious because it's just a silly moment, but it works because he just gets all the way into the bit and then uses the filmmaking to raise it up.
Yeah. I'm actually curious because I know like Edgar Wright got started like super young as a director because I think he started making his first like movies because he started working in TV at first back in like the 90s. I'm actually curious. Yeah, he started working in TV in 96, so he was only like 22. Did he even go to film school?
Let's see here. We have Edgar Wright, alma mater, Bournemouth and Poole College of Art and Design. That's where he got his education.
Oh shit! I guess he did.
Yeah, and I guess I'm not specifically meaning like obviously
film
I'm
school
mentioning the
kind of
film
thing.
school brats because like a lot of them went to USC, NYU, things like that. But it's like there's an element of that style of filmmaking where they like are really big into movies. Whenever they use the technology and in the technique, they're referencing movies that they love.
It's kind of like that postmodernist idea with like Quentin Tarantino, Robert Rodriguez, Kevin Smith, where a lot of their movies are filled with references to older films, kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think that's a good one to mention too, because it's almost like a combination of the two, where the film school brats were big into films, but mostly like the foreign films they saw while showing them at their school, and then like the independent brats of that era were into well pretty much every movie they could get on VHS and watch every day, which gave them this like massive film knowledge to pull from and make homages to because that's where they got their education. And I feel like there's a mix of the two because you can certainly tell that Wright has a love for pushing himself, even with the limited resources that he might have had in making this movie.
That's actually a good observation because I don't know how, because this movie seems like it was done on the cheap, right? But it looks expensive, right?
It certainly has a level of value. You kind of get surprised because the one thing I noticed in the first part of this movie is that we really don't leave the main character's house for a while into the film. I mean, yeah, we go out and see his job, we see the neighborhood a bit, but you really only walk around the block, obviously in that famous Edgar Wright tracking shot, obligatory for almost every one of his movies.
Is that really a thing that he does in every one of his movies?
Well, I know this one, Baby Driver has it, obviously, with the famous kind of, music dancing bit over the credits. I haven't seen World's End, so I don't know if there is one in there. And I can't remember if
there is one in I guess Hot Fuzz kind of has one if we're talking about like when he's doing his run through the town.
Yeah, you could call that one. There's always like this kind of, I think really what it is, it's not so much the tracking shot is his stamp, but it's connecting his character to an environment. I think he realizes that his characters exist within an environment that they're comfortable in. And it's especially apparent because that's important to the story of this movie, the main character being comfortable in his environment, that is, because that's kind of his flaw. But I think that's what he tries to show in those shots.
Okay. I mean, so we talked about Edgar Wright a lot. He, who directed the film. Let's talk about some of the actors and the characters they portray, which is Edgar Wright's constant collaborators is Simon Pegg and Nick Frost playing Shaun and Ed.
Yeah. And I believe Simon Pegg also had a hand in writing this, didn't he?
I believe so, yeah. I think actually him and Nick Frost helped write it.
Right.
No. It was just Simon Pegg and Edgar Wright. They wrote it together. because they worked
Okay.
together. Actually, almost everyone in Shaun of the Dead worked with Edgar Wright when he did Spaced, which was his like own show ran like TV show that he made in England
Right.
before this movie came out. I think it was a couple years before this movie came out actually.
Yeah.
But yeah, so they were already like collaborators. But Simon Pegg as Shaun, do you like him in the role? Do you think he does a good job? Do you like Shaun as a
Iconic, actually.
character?
I think that nobody could see Shaun of Shaun of the Dead as anybody else because it's such like a iconic role when you think about it. It's very indicative of the mid aughts and comedy filmmaking.
Hmm.
This comedy duo as well. It's like you could not pair them with anybody else.
Which is really weird when you think about it, because I honestly, it is hard for me to think of movies that Simon Pegg and Nick Frost have been in that weren't together.
Yeah, it's almost like the American equivalent of like
Seth Rogen and
Seth.
James Franco.
Exactly. Yeah, you took the
Yeah.
words right out of my mouth. It's like when you think about it, there's these comedy. I mean, comedy duos are obvious, anyways, and throughout history, there's always been.
Your Abbotts and
Two,
Costellos and,
yeah, and
Laurel and Hardys.
Your Bob Hopes and what's his name?
Bing Crosby?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's the kind of pairing that we have going on here. But yeah, I couldn't see anybody else. Nick Frost is perfect for the part. I mean, big fat slob, basically. And
He's also
Shaun,
method.
yeah, I mean, really, when you think about it. But
Well,
Simon Pegg playing Shaun is like, Simon Pegg has this really good ability to play, even though he does the exact opposite in Hot Fuzz. He has this really good ability to play like spineless person, you know? And that's kind of who Simon is at the beginning of the movie. Is he's really just spineless, and then like at the behest of Nick Frost, who they hang out and have fun together, but it's really only because Ed is like forcing him to drink and have fun. And
Ed is like a man child in the movie. Like, I don't really know. I don't even know how old Shaun and Ed are supposed to be
probably
in
like
this
late
movie.
20s is I feel like what it is, mid to
Yeah.
late 20s, because it's like before everybody has a house, and or really right as everybody is getting a house and getting married, because he runs into his, I think, ex-girlfriend or old friend on the street
Yeah.
who had just bought a house. But it's kind of right before they're on like the edge of the rest of their life, because that's obviously the conflict at the beginning is he and his girlfriend Liz are like, she's tired of going to the same bar and hanging out with her friends there, and she thinks that they need to get out and travel and get married and all this stuff.
She's ready to move on into the rest of their life, and he's not there yet.
Yeah, which is a very British thing that I think about it, because that I don't think that kind of thing exists in America. If you're
What do you
from
mean?
well, it's like if you're from your small town and you're comfortable in it, you stay. And then if you're from a small town and then you're not comfortable, nobody else really understands you, and you have to like go to New York to get out or something. But I feel like there's an element to this that is like, because England has a much more like community oriented, like they have villages and things where people's have grown up and lived there for like hundreds of years, you know?
Oh, like they're like, it's a thing where it's like your great great grandparents were born and raised in the same house you live in now.
Yeah, it's the pub that your grandparents went to. It's like there's something different about it culturally there that was kind of unrecognizable to America. Because here it's like you go off to college and you move states away, you know, you got
I
out
mean,
and
I get what you mean. Like my grandparents, like my granddad was from like Ohio, my grandmother was from like Arkansas or something like that.
yeah, exactly. It's not abnormal for you to live hundreds of miles away, because yeah, like my grandparents are from San Francisco, then they moved to Arizona, then it's like my dad was born in Phoenix, and or no, he was born in Coronado, San Diego, lived in Phoenix most of his life, then they moved here, and it's like,
There's a lot more migration in America when there's thousands of miles to roam.
yeah, so it was kind of an interesting little like, you kind of sympathize with Simon, or Shaun, that is, but there's a little bit of me that was like, well, why don't you want to go out with your girlfriend and travel Europe? That sounds great. But I
It's
guess when
also
it
cheap as
is,
hell.
well, yeah, for them, it's like it's right across the pond, just so
Oh
to speak.
God. My buddy actually, he went over to Europe to study abroad for like his philosophy degree.
Oh,
And
that's exactly what a philosophy major would do.
oh yeah. I mean, he hasn't used it for anything since he graduated. He's trying to get a real job now and it sucks. But when he went over there, he said that it cost him $50 to fly from England to Italy to go on a pub crawl in like Florence and then fly back, and it was like $50 round trip.
Yeah, because when you think about it, it's like no different from going from like here to Dallas, but
It's
then
not even that.
going
Like
from
it's
like
from
here to Dallas in the United States costs you like hundreds of dollars still.
yeah. Actually, the equivalent is if we were in England, we could drive. It's a day trip to drive to Germany.
Yeah,
Like that's like us going to like Tijuana.
yeah, it is kind of funny when you think about that.
Yeah, but besides the point. But no, I mean, I kind of get where you're coming from. Where it's kind of weird to wonder why Shaun doesn't want to like expand outside of his comfort zone. But I mean, I think that's still a very understandable like character flaw for him. Is he's comfortable where he is. He's his best friend is Ed is the epitome of kind of I guess where he will end up if he doesn't go off with Liz, because Ed's happy. You can exactly say he's happy. He's just, a man child. He sits on the couch all day, scratches his balls, doesn't have a job, and he plays video games all day and drinks.
True, and there's the kind of problem too where he's like everybody else's problem because obviously Ed does not have a fucking job.
Oh no, he
And
sells a bit of weed now and again.
yeah, and that's the other thing that's kind of funny is like thinking about that nowadays. It's like I can't imagine anybody just like not
Couch
having a
surfing for
job and
5
living off their
years.
friends in an apartment.
I mean, that might just be because, we don't have deadbeat friends like that.
Yeah,
I
and
mean,
rent
like,
is through the roof, but that's
hmm?
a different point. Well, I was gonna say rent's through the roof too, but
Yeah, again, like you gotta also remember, we live in California where, like, for those who don't know the fun market of housing in California, you can get a studio apartment in California and it's gonna cost you probably like $2,000 a month in rent.
yeah, like a decent that for like a good studio apartment. If you want like a rundown one, you can probably get something where you and the roommate you share it with, the roommate you by the way share one bedroom only, and that's it. That's all you get. Probably can have two full-time jobs and afford it, but
And that's
yeah,
if
I
you
don't know.
granted, that's also if you want to live in like Los Angeles proper. If you want to live out in like the middle of the desert, you can probably get away with it. But if you want to live in like Los Angeles, so for everybody who wants to live in Los Angeles, LA, Hollywood, yeah, no, like getting a shit apartment where your neighbor's where you're oddly enough your neighbor's a meth head, but the rent's still like $5,000 a month. Yeah, that's kind of what you're looking at. In where Shaun's living, like honestly, Ed might be able to get away paying rent by selling weed.
Yeah, that's true. Uh,
Again, 2004 economy, man.
what a time.
What a time to be
Um,
alive.
but that beside the point. We kind of
Yeah,
move on, and things start to get a little weird in town. Shaun starts to notice a few things that are
little
odd.
wacky.
Yeah, people coughing it up on the bus, looking a little sickly.
Did you
Homeless
get
men in the park.
coronavirus vibes off of this,
Yeah,
or is that
a
just
little
me?
bit. I was thinking about this pairing this week and the whole zombie movie thing, and I was like, there's going to be a COVID pandemic film eventually. Like people are this. I think Dean and I were actually talking about this the other day, where it's like we were talking a bit like about what the film movement coming out of COVID and quarantine and everything's going to be.
Because it's obviously gonna happen. Not like after every giant event of history, there's always a film movement that comes out of it, or an artistic movement that comes out of it.
Yeah, and especially when this one, though probably not as culturally important yet, this is starting to feel like it's going to have an impact that will produce something like film noir after World War II. But I was kind of thinking about that technologically. I swear it's going to be such a pain in the ass to deal with how many people want to tackle the pandemic theme in a film, because who the hell wants to think about this more? I mean,
Oh God.
because when you think about it, like noir was about addressing the anxieties of society, but like the war was a legitimate concern for everybody, and especially one that you could probably do something about. And that's kind of the problem here is how do you do something about something you're not supposed to do something about?
That is, I feel there's going to be a string of COVID inspired zombie movies to come out of this. So we're going to get a zombie boom like we haven't seen since like the 1980s.
Yeah.
It's going to be great.
I
It's going to
mean,
be great.
if you think about it, I actually just watched that South Park pandemic special, and that's already, I think, a precursor of what's going to happen a little bit. I mean,
Oh, I
obviously it's
still need to
South
watch
Park.
that.
I'll give you my login. I just bought it.
No,
But
no
all
worries. I
that,
got the login. I was just being lazy.
yeah. But besides the point, back to Shaun of the Dead.
Shaun of the Dead.
So
So, yes.
yeah, so we wake up after a drunken morning. Liz has broken up with Shaun, and he's devastated. He's on his way to work, but the town is kind of empty,
Yeah.
and
It's awesome when you watch everything in the background for the first tracking shot and then compare with the second tracking shot and it's the exact same except everything is destroyed. It's also kind of curious, like this wasn't filmed on a set. This was filmed on like an actual street that Edgar Wright closed down.
you wonder because it is a little bit as if it was a set. Maybe I could see it being like a closed set because it's very. I mean, it looks exactly like what you think in a English neighborhood would be. But there's an element to which like the size of that tracking shot is indicative of a set.
Mm.
I don't know. I would be interested to know what they did for that. Because this was a Universal film, right?
It was distributed by Universal.
Oh, okay. So if they didn't
Yeah.
have, then maybe it was a closed off set. Because part of me is thinking if it was a Universal Studios production, then they might have had access to that kind of thing. Because that kind of means that you're putting a little bit more into the production value.
Yeah.
But when you think about it too, like all the closed off sets they have for the streets are pretty small and out of the way. I mean, aside from maybe like outside the pub, it's not like probably anything they had to pay arm and a leg to close off for filming.
That's true. Also, so apparently that pub, the Winchester, I think that's a real pub.
Oh, probably. I wouldn't be
Yeah.
surprised.
Yeah, from what I was able to find, it's based on a real place, and I think the actual location was real too. So, when COVID is done, you want to go to England and get pissed at the Winchester?
And see if that's a real rifle.
The rifle's totally real. Benny told me so. Yeah.
Yeah. So speaking of the real rifle, our journey does begin when Shaun comes home and Ed reveals that
There's a
a
girl
lady
in the
garden.
garden. There's a girl in the garden. Yeah, and this leads to the funniest way to killing a zombie.
Yeah, I think this is definitely where we start to get the whole you think you know what you would do during a zombie apocalypse, but this is really what you would do. Because it's the most pathetic zombie fight I've ever seen.
It's so good because they go out and they start throwing like just what junk at them.
Junk and records and
Oh,
I mean at first even they just throw like a rock at her.
Also, did it tug at your heartstrings when they were starting to go through his record collection, and that was the immediate sense of now Shaun actually has to prune his fucking like record collection. Now he actually has to clear that shit out.
Yeah, it is almost interesting how it's like it's probably not I don't know if it would be like intentional. That'd be a pretty specific thing to be intentional about, but there's like a level of symbolism in the character already starting to change when he has to literally get rid of these like boyish possessions.
That's I didn't even think about that, but no, that's actually like that might actually be a point because like he throws away like the Batman soundtrack and all those others like random records and stuff like that where it's like, oh, they're, stuff he probably bought when he was like way younger and he's only keeping the stuff that he kind of like needs now.
Well, yeah, I believe the first one they throw was the second album he had ever bought.
That's the second album I ever bought. Oh, chuck it. And it explodes.
Yeah.
no, you can't throw that away. That's Liz's. Oh, she did dump you, and fucking throws it. And then that's when he
Exactly. Yeah.
breaks and goes to the shed.
Yeah. The other thing I want to point out about these two movies as well is like there's a really good for anybody listening of the six people that are writers, really pay attention to the what if factor with both of these movies. The directors and writers really knew how to take like all of the ideas they could flesh out possibly about the characters mixing with the genre and using them, because really like when you think about it, it's such a, I mentioned it before, but such a specific thing to think about. Like you'd think the writer in any other setting would just think about going straight to the shed and getting a shovel and trying to beat the zombie in the head and making that the comedic bit.
Lean into like the whole actiony based story kind of
Yeah,
thing.
but it's almost like the writers were like, well, I have this personal anecdote I could add to this that really actually makes it even funnier for being pathetic. Because that's what obviously the scene is trying to do. It's trying to show how pathetic these two are when trying to deal with this situation that's super serious. Um, yeah, I give kudos to Edgar Wright, and then also later on George A. Romero, as we'll talk about later, for some of the things he puts in there. Um, but yeah, so moving on, we fight the zombie, we defeat the
The
zombie after they do get together a couple weapons and basically beat the shit.
that is like the most weird tonal shift when
Oh
it's just
yeah,
like, oh, this is funny. Oh, they're throwing it. It's like, oh, they are just fucking up that zombie. Ooh,
yeah. I
ooh, this
mean,
is
tonal
gross.
shifts like this, it's very like the. I think the Coens do this a lot. The sharp tonal shifts. The Wright does this, but there are a lot of comedy directors that do this where I think it's a brilliant thing when you can use it, because like that cut straight from beating of the zombie to like him holding the cup of tea.
And just
It's
being
just
like fucking dead eyed.
yeah. Oh man.
And around that time, that's when, they realize, okay, they're gonna have to go make a plan and go and kind of save everybody and ride this whole thing out. And then we get him, he's like, okay, he's gonna have to go around, get his mom, kill Philip. Sorry, Philip. Go around, save Liz, and then go to the Winchester to kind of wait this whole thing out. And then comedy ensues when he actually tries to do that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because Pete, we found that earlier that he was bit.
Yeah.
Um,
Their third roommate, who is the one kind of antagonizing Ed and Shaun
yeah,
and all that.
he's like the opposite character to Ed in this little three-way story. Um, but obviously, Pete is also kind of a dick. So
Pete
I mean,
is the
rightfully
biggest
so,
asshole.
a little bit, but
What do you mean?
I mean,
Pete is like super asshole. All right, he's like well beyond the point of being like reasonable asshole to Ed, right?
I could see why Ed might be tough to deal with, in a living situation. Don't get me wrong. Uh, but
You're over there being
Pete,
like, I'd be Pete in this movie. Fuck Ed.
unfortunately, probably. Though I wouldn't let a crackhead just bite me out of nowhere. I don't see how. It is kind of funny how like how do you just let somebody bite you like before, like really when you think about it,
Okay.
before the pandemic begins, who are you letting get that close to you that they're just gonna bite you out of nowhere?
Well, he said he got like mugged on the way home from work, and that those muggers were supposed to be like the fucking crackhead zombie, whatever.
Yeah,
But the
yeah,
other point is like, Pete, like from what we see, you're like 6'4" and you're probably like 240. You can't just shove these people away. Like Shaun is more effective at beating up zombies in throwing zombies around in fisticuffs than you are. What the fuck?
yeah, and kind of like how they did a few times in Dawn of the Dead. I mean, they threw some of those zombies around.
Oh, I
Um,
can't wait for us to get to the stunt
yeah,
dummies in that movie. Oh, so
absolutely.
good.
But so they do leave the house after Pete is well completely turned. They take his car, which Ed is more than happy to take the wheel for. And the journey is afoot to get to the Winchester. They first stop off at Sean's mum's house.
Yes. And they're there, and he has this whole conflict with his stepdad because his stepdad's kind of a dick. From what we understand.
He's just like a stoic British man who is obviously cold. I think this is a theme in a lot of like British stories, but the older generation is always cold because that's how they were raised and how manhood is supposed to be. You're supposed to be cold and calculated and
so on
matter
and so
of
forth.
fact.
Yeah. This whole stiff upper lip mentality.
Yeah. But there's obviously a suspicion that poor old Philip has been bit and is sick. And it turns out that I don't think he isn't. I don't think it totally tracked for me. He's in the sling, but is he feeling better, or what's going on with him again?
Oh, so what happened was some guys tried to get into the house, the Zombonis,
Right.
and Philip, fought him off, and they bit him in the arm, and then they put his hand into a sling, ran it under a cold tap, and he's just, kind of
Right.
chilling in the house, yeah.
Yeah.
No, he's starting to feel like shit.
That trusty cold tap.
Yeah, I ran it under a cold tap, You remember cutting your hand when you're little and your parents just ran it under the faucet and then just put bandages on and told you to go back to playing?
Yeah, I even remember one time I think my dad cut my eyelid with a knife accidentally trying to do something. But that's a story for a different day.
Yikes, okay.
Yeah, Dad was not trying to attack me or anything, but it was one of those moments where you're trying to fix something as a parent and you accidentally hurt your kid and you're like, fuck.
Yeah. I've had car hoods closed on my hands more than once.
Oh yeah, I just had a trunk closed in my hand. That was a son of a bitch.
It's good times. Good times. But
yeah, gotta love not living in an apocalypse where things might not be able to fix and you'd be basically in the Middle Ages again.
Yeah.
So obviously they make the pickup. Philip and Barb are in the party, so to speak, and they're going to be on their way now to go get Liz and her two friends that will tag along, Diane and David. So they get to the apartment and there's this gag that had happened earlier in the movie that they don't want to let Shaun up because they think he's there to bother Liz.
Yeah, he's there to just be a douchebag.
Yeah, and that's kind of a funny little because it's I like the way that this movie also combines the genres. I think that's another way it gets away with a lot of its parody is that it's a breakup movie disguised as a zombie movie. Especially when we get to the resolution, it'll be very apparent that there's a brilliant combination of the two. And there's that the whole zombie thing is almost like a metaphor for what it takes to survive in a modern relationship. But that we'll get to that later.
Yeah, because now you're starting to lose me. I'm usually in on the weird artsy stuff, but now you're starting to lose me.
Well, I'll prove my point a little bit later when we get to that. But we make the pickup after a little bit of fussing about it, and everybody piles into the Jag. And now we're back on our way to the Winchester.
And right around that time, that's when Philip turns and he gets all of them to basically flee the car, and now they're on foot, having to track through the gardens of England.
Right, and there's the famous fence gag that everybody loves so much.
That is in every one of the Cornetto trilogies.
Right, and it's also probably in everybody's gift library.
Yeah.
We have that. There's a neighbor that Barb recognizes that has turned into a zombie. This is, I believe, even though it's revealed later, where she's bit.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm correct. And they run into another party, of which we find Shaun's friend from earlier, and then also a mirror version
of the entire
alternate universe of
the alternate universe version where they're actually competent and shit.
Also of which where we get a cameo with Martin Freeman.
That's not even a cameo. This is before he was even famous. I think the only thing he'd done after that point was the English version of The Office.
Yeah, just as well, by the way, we might mention that Diane, Lucy Davis, was also the Pam in that version.
Yeah, so we see the meeting of Jim and Pam from the English Office in Shaun of the Dead.
Yeah, it almost makes you wonder why the American Office never did maybe a slasher parody or something that Jim and Pam would have met through and at some point. But
That would have
um,
been tits. It would have been great.
yeah, Universal, get on it. You own both properties. Um, so we move on, and complications have kind of become that they are outside the Winchester, but there's those damn zombies everywhere, blocking the entrance.
And
So
then
we,
they pull the move that The Walking Dead will rip off years later of
yeah,
pretending to be zombies.
which is kind of brilliant when you think about it. I like the idea that the zombies are kind of predatorial in that way, where they don't recognize other zombies, but they recognize the kind of sharp movements. It's almost like a T-Rex, but like a lame T-Rex.
Yeah, they only recognize it when you're running from them.
Yeah. Which, it's kind of funny. Like you said earlier, I have a problem with the zombie genre as a whole. These movies get away with it because, again, they are hilarious and they make fun of it a little bit. But when I was a kid, the guy who wrote the original World War Z books, um,
Yeah, Mel Brooks's kid.
yeah, he wrote like this book that went along with the series that was like a guide, a zombie survival guide.
Oh God, I remember those.
It was one of my favorite books because it was actually very interesting the way he like dissected the science of zombies in this universe, how to combat them, how they worked, what their biology was, even down to the fact that he explained how that the zombies were like inflicted by a parasite that got into their brains. And it was fascinating. And, at the end, there's all these short stories about characters in that universe. But like, so that series had like a science to these zombies that made it seem very realistic and like it
Mhm.
could happen. A lot of times, these movies, including the World War Z adaptation, just seem like Hollywood bullshit.
What do you mean? Like, are you just
It,
mad that zombie movies don't go out of their way to explain why they're zombies? They're zombies. It's fine.
yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. There's a lot of horror movies that have like this unexplained logic to them that you're just supposed to like buy into out of like suspension of disbelief.
Yeah, just roll with it.
Yeah, but it's like there's part of it to me where I'm like, it's kind of like what we experienced with slasher movies in I Know What You Did Last Summer and Urban Legends. It's like there's kind of this whole like disconnection from the police and like why aren't we at all trying to figure that out sooner? I mean, if kids are dying at a school, how come this isn't like a bigger national thing? That obviously then Scream kind of addresses, but that's my point, I guess, is like how is it that zombies can run at like 40 miles an hour or whatever, and like it just like is a little bit convoluted to me. So
These zombies don't run at 40 miles an hour. Like, I get your point when you say, like, oh, 28 Days Later zombies are the new Dawn of the Dead style zombies from the remake. Yeah, like those running at like Mach 5. Yeah, that doesn't make a whole hell of a lot of sense. But, like, bro, they're just zombies.
yeah, but that's I guess my thing is like I can never just be like they're just zombies because it's like, well, this is kind of a serious subject when you think about it. I feel like there needs to be a little bit more thought given into it because sometimes it just feels like I'm just supposed to buy it, and that's just cheap to me. But beside the point is like,
They're just zombies. It's fine.
so this is what I was going to bring up is that both of these movies kind of address this fact that opposite to my point about like the logics of the zombies, we also bring up this side that like the zombies may still be human in some element, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of conflict that will come up in the next scene when they get to the Winchester and we find out that Barb has been bit, and then they have to eliminate her as she starts to die and then turn.
And they also have to fight off the oncoming zombie horde trying to get into the Winchester.
Yeah, because it was kind of, I guess when I think about it, it was kind of teased with like the Barb Phillip scene when Phillip turns and she thinks her husband is still in there.
Mm-hmm.
But I kind of like that they address this versus the whole, you know, what I was bringing up, the whole logic of the zombies. So I think it does a better job of making me forget the logic and buying into it, because there's an actual. I don't think this movie tries to make a whole moral argument about it, but it certainly addresses it and is like, you should think about this, instead of the fact that we haven't explained how the zombies are turning.
You don't. That is one of the worst arguments I've ever heard about not liking zombie movies. The zombie movies, you're just supposed to accept that, the zombies happened. Why did the zombies happen? Make one up. I think it's more insulting when zombie movies try to say, oh, why are the zombies around? Oh, because of a government experiment that's gone horribly awry. And it's like, well,
I don't know. I still think that I still would like something that maybe connects it to like a virus, or like a whole. It's kind of like, okay, so I have this other problem with like King Kong a little bit. I do not hate King Kong. I actually enjoy the original.
Mm-hmm.
It's that I also don't get this for some reason explanation that there's just one giant gorilla on an island, and nothing else.
He's the last of his species.
Recently, there was apparently a T-Rex on that island as well.
he was the last of his species. Like, how is that not a thing? And the age of when monsters die out and modern science starts to give rise. What happens when the last of the monsters runs amok in this modernist city?
I don't know. It's like it kind of goes back to this other thing too. This may be getting the argument totally convoluted, but like bigger dogs live less life than smaller dogs. So when I think about it, is like, how is a giant gorilla living hundreds of years or whatever to be the last of his species? It doesn't make much sense to me.
How do you know it was hundreds of years? Maybe he, we got there after his parents died.
They had just missed the giant gorilla.
They just missed the giant gorilla apocalypse. Yes.
So then, where are all the giant gorilla bodies? I mean, what's the deal with that?
He buried him. Maybe he's a Christian. Wanted to bury him for Jesus. You don't know that.
Yeah, because it's totally Christian to climb the Empire State Building and kidnap a woman.
Yeah, totally.
Well, actually, that does kind of sound Christian.
Wow, fucking savage over here.
But okay, so besides the point, because this is all getting on a larger tangent.
You not liking good horror movies.
Whatever. Well, no, that's the thing, is both of these are good zombie movies, so I'm complimenting the fact that they've done a good job at addressing their story.
Okay.
All beside the point, and that we kind of get down to the climax of the movie is where everybody starts to get picked off inside the Winchester. Obviously, Barb was shot dead because she was turned. They had to do something about that. But David obviously had smashed open one of the windows when he was kind of desperate to get inside. And that leaves them kind of like sitting ducks, because the zombies have a way to get in, and they're certainly noticing what's going on inside. We get the obligatory also David Wright musically timed action sequence that Baby Driver takes that and smashes it into the ground, but then we get a nice little piece with Queen that's almost kind of like it's funnier because the action is pathetic while it's happening,
where they just can't kill him with the pull sticks.
Yeah,
which seems weird, right? You'd figure a pool cue, you'd probably be able to beat somebody pretty hard with those.
Yeah, but like, he's an undead zombie, so he probably doesn't feel a whole lot of anything. So it's kind of more mildly annoying in my mind. Especially when I'm kind of surprised that the pool sticks don't even like break over his back or anything. But obviously then they kill that zombie, and then that is further exacerbated by Ed winning a jackpot on his gambling machine and alerting all of the zombies to their whereabouts.
And all the zombies start breaking in. They try to hold off with the gun above the Winchester, which is actually real. And and they're fighting it off, and then David and Diane. Yeah, David and Diane, they both get chaka. They get killed. Barbara's dead. Phil was already zombified. It's down to Ed, Liz, and Shaun. And Ed gets caught trying to light up a Molotov cocktail. And then it leads us down to Shaun and Liz as they escape behind the bar, with Ed eventually hurling his giant ass up and over on top of them as the bar lights a fire, and they're now hanging out in the cellar trying to figure out what to do now that they're trapped.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting how, again, don't know if it's intentional or not. It feels intentional, so I'm going to say it is.
Mhm.
Wright literally puts them in a low point in the story by putting them in the cellar. I think that's
Yeah.
kind of interesting when you think about his use of environment.
Well, this is the lowest possible point they reach in the story, right? This is the lowest that Shaun gets. Well, I mean, I guess him having to kill his own mother, that's probably his lowest emotional point, but this feels like the lowest emotional point like the whole story kind of reaches. This is their rock bottom.
Yeah, there's kind of an interesting like extended climax low point hybrid because it kind of feels like in a zombie movie the climax of any of these stories is either when you escape the zombies or the zombies overrun you, right?
Hmm.
And maybe Wright doesn't want to just immediately let that go, you know? Kind of like Dawn of the Dead does a similar brilliant thing right before its kind of, we'll call it
Ending.
heroic climax.
Yeah, we'll get to that part. Oh,
Yeah.
oh, I can't wait.
And I kind of like that the low point does start, like you said, with the killing of Barb, because it really is starting to spell the end. And then the cellar is like, it's almost like this classic version of where could they possibly go next. It's like a cliffhanger, kind of. That's what it reminds me of.
Yeah.
It reminds me of like a serialized cliffhanger where Flash Gordon or whatever is hanging on the edge of the cliff and is like, what will happen to our characters next? Because there really is nowhere else they can go. The cellar door is locked. The zombies are in the other part of the cellar.
Well, yeah, they're beating down the cellar door. They're trying to get in there.
And the only place left is really, it's like, well, I guess it's time to, I love that Peg mimes that out.
Yeah, where they're trying to figure out, whether or not they could pull the whole murder suicide with Liz and Shaun. And
Yeah.
I like Ed's reaction when Shaun's like, "Well, we don't have a third bullet. What about Ed?" And Ed's like, "I'm okay being eaten. You two kids figure it out. The zombies can eat me. I'm fine. I'm just rolling with this now."
Yeah. But that really is like, I think what I love most about this ending, right, is that it finally, the two kind of A B stories, the zombie apocalypse and this interpersonal
Like
conflict with,
relationship here.
yeah, has kind of been a little separate. They're starting to convene inside the Winchester, and then the cellar, it becomes like, it's not like they are converging, it's like they've been forced together to converge, where it either has to be, Ed can either change and save his friend, or just like decide, yeah, we should all just die down here. And we get this heartbreaking moment where Ed decides to let them leave and kind of bait the zombies for them.
Yeah, they
Um,
realized that they could get the cellar door open with the I guess the winch
yeah,
switch.
it's like a service elevator sort of thing
Yeah, they
for
figure
like
they can get
loading
it
in
open.
supplies.
And Ed's like, "Nah, you two keep going. My run's over."
Yeah,
That was so sad. That was sadder than um Shaun having to kill his own mother. That was
yeah.
sadder than Shaun reconciling with his stepfather before his own death.
So this actually, I think, brings up my point I made earlier about it being like a kind of a metaphoric story.
Mm-hmm.
Because think about this, right?
Yes.
You have a best friend, you're best friends with him, but your life is going nowhere in town.
Yeah.
And if you stay there, like was stated earlier in the movie, you're literally going to die going to the pub that you go to every night. That's the rest of your life.
You stay a forever 22-year-old trying
Yeah,
to
or like you
drink
just,
and play video
this
games
is
and yeah.
this is where your life ends. This is the scope of your life. The world is only as far as it takes to walk to the Winchester. And obviously his girlfriend Liz doesn't want that. But in the cellar, they're forced literally to choose that they can either die in the Winchester or leave and venture out into the world, the zombified, fucked up world, and choose to try and make it out as impossible as it seems. Ed obviously realizes that that's what he's chosen, but he's okay with it. So he's going to let go of Shaun so he has a chance to make it out. In that way, they're literally and figuratively saying that in this climax. And I think this is the most genius part of the movie, is that it's not just a combination of genres to like twist it a little bit. It's like there's really a metaphoric meaning to him taking this zombie movie and pasting it on this breakup movie.
Honestly, that scene and that whole like idea is really, really genius on the part of Edgar Wright and the writers of this movie, because that's really what it is. It's Shaun having to realize that he can either stay with his best friend and be, that 22-year-old who has nothing going on in his life but is happy drinking and playing video games, or grow the fuck up. That's what this movie is. It's like 90 minutes of Shaun growing up. And
then immediately being saved by the SWAT team, which
yeah,
feels like the most deus ex machina kind of thing, but also is like, well, they already made the choice to fight their way out, so why not just save the characters? They already made their correct moral decision, so let's just make the cool gun sequence happen.
That was fucking ridiculous, right? As soon as they just like, they come up and then, boom, SWAT team comes in and starts blasting everybody down. And I'm like, where the fuck were you guys for the last fucking half hour?
Yeah, well, it's convenient, but they also kind of earned it because, like you said, it's not before they made the choice and then they're like, great, we don't have to make a decision. They've already made the decision, so they've earned it. Let's just have Edgar Wright. Edgar Wright loves making his action sequences, so he gets to come in with the guns ablazing and the cavalry rides in, per se.
Yep.
And we see what's-her-face from earlier, now alone, unfortunately, but...
Well, I'm assuming her entire crew survived because she was competent.
Well, I think that's the implication, is that everybody in her crew died, because she says something to the effect of, well, I'm glad somebody made it.
Well, that's a reference to when she met Shaun in the beginning of the movie.
Really?
Remember when they first met together? It's like, oh, Shaun. Oh, cool. How are you? Oh, I see you and Liz are still together. Well, I'm glad somebody made it. The only difference is the context of the scene. Actually, it's the same thing when, because I noticed this because I'm a fucking OCD crazy person. When Shaun is trying to talk to Ed when he's playing his video game, he's just like, look, oh, top left. Oh, reload. Oh, good shot. That's the exact same like dialogue section as when they're in the Winchester. When Ed is over Shaun's shoulder and Shaun's holding the gun, he's like, top left, reload, good shot. Like, it's a weird thing in this movie. There's a lot of lines from the Act 1 that get repeated in Act 3 that you don't really notice.
But I think that's a smart writing play. I mean, it's calling back to your beginnings is always a good idea when showing like when you want to show character change and even a character's strengths versus their flaws.
Well, it really is, because it's also really smart because it's the exact same dialogue. It's just different context.
Yeah.
Which is really interesting how they do it in this movie, because I think that's also the other thing. It's you were saying it's like it's a a relationship movie in the guise of a zombie movie, and it's like they're almost the same kind of thing, just in a different context.
A little bit, yeah.
You're dealing with all these hordes of emotions, like you have to deal with a horde of zombies.
Or like I think it's just like how we'll see again in Dawn of the Dead. I think there's a lot of I don't think it's any surprise that he used Shaun of the Dead as the title, because it's probably getting a lot of inspirations from that specific movie versus the original or any other movie of the franchise, because there's a lot of plays on population and consumerism and how it all feels a little bit zombified.
Well, I mean, I guess that makes sense, because this movie does have a very interesting consumer thing to it.
Yeah, I mean, Shaun works in an appliance store. He goes to the corner store every day. Coca-Cola makes an appearance.
He
People on the
literally,
bus are zombified.
the only
Everybody
place
has
he feels safe is a place where he goes and buys booze and buys
yeah,
stuff, which is
everybody's
just a
all
pub.
whacked out with their earbuds in. I mean, yeah, I think there's certainly a parallel to that. Um, but yeah, everybody is safe, and a year later, or 6 months or whatever, things are generally back to normal. Interesting how the world can pull together and get out of a zombie apocalypse faster than we've been able to get out of COVID. But
Well, I'm
uh,
going to put it to you like this, okay? If COVID worked like a zombie apocalypse, we wouldn't have even closed down. Like, you'd just be like eyeballing zombies on your drive to work.
yeah, it's kind of funny. It's almost sad when you think about it, how the way America is right now, we probably could have dealt with a zombie apocalypse in an easier fashion because of everybody just being like, "Oh, great, now I have something to shoot."
Honest, dude, like, that's probably the weirdest thing ever. It's like, everybody's like, fucking America. They can't handle COVID. They can't handle anything. They can't do anything. They're all incompetent. But I'm like, as soon as the zombies show up, what country has all the guns? America. What country is deaf surviving the zombie apocalypse? That's America. All right.
Yeah,
We'll just get all the rednecks
I
to
don't know
rally
if
together.
I don't know if that realization is good or bad, but you know what?
It's terrible. I'll answer your question. It's fucking terrible.
Yeah, probably, probably. But all things aside, Shaun gets to live his life with his girl Liz, and gets to go
Actually
see
gets a
Ed in the
little,
shed.
yeah. Ed is now zombified, but they still get to be best friends in the shed playing video games. You know, it's one of those things you don't have to give up everybody from your past, but you know, kind of have to lock those emotions away every once in a while. Maybe only
Yeah,
visit them occasionally.
yeah. Which again, love this scene because I think there's a common writing rule per se. I won't say it's strict, but it's a good thing to have in your stories. Is that new equilibrium sequence where you kind of get to see the character in their new world after all the change.
Mm.
Um, and I think this is a nice way to wrap it up. I think it is a nice little bow on the
Nice
present
little
this
cherry on top of the Shaun of the Dead.
Sunday.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's Shaun of the Dead.
Yeah. So that is Shaun of the Dead. You have anything else to say about this one?
Honestly, held up a lot better than I thought it would. I legitimately thought that this probably wouldn't have aged that well, considering it's, 16 years old at this point. And, maybe some of the tech or some of the writing or something just wouldn't have worked really well, like now. But honestly, everything about it, the characters held up, the story held up, and honestly, like, looking at it and pulling a lot more like the themes and stuff like that out of the movie, it's really well written.
Yeah,
It's a lot more well written than I thought it'd be.
it's fantastically written, and you say that the tech held up, and I didn't even notice when I was watching it because I have like the Blu-ray HD copy, so it's all
Clean
pretty.
and crystal.
Yeah, and when I think about it, it's like really you wouldn't be able to discern like pick this out any differently from any of like the 4K Blackmagic cameras or 8K or whatever they're using for cinematic pieces now. Because Edgar Wright does a really good job at not just like cutting either. He has this brilliant thing where he uses his transitions to the fullest potential that he can. A lot of like those really quick pans to cut between scenes, or like he does those creative cuts. I think there's a really good one that he uses in Hot Fuzz
Mhm.
when he travels to the new city, and you get to see like the character change in that. It's like a montage, but it's like cut much more brilliantly than a normal montage.
It's really weird. This guy, he's very good at knowing exactly how to do whip pans and fast cuts and edit, and he knows the most efficient shots to use for montaging, and it's very good.
Yeah,
But
it's
yeah,
almost it sucks because it's one of those things where I feel like it's a brilliant way to keep your audience engaged for 100% of the film, because then they're literally not getting lost in any of the cuts because it still is, transmitting information to you. But it's also something that I feel like only Edgar Wright can do now because
it's his
liter
style. It's his
yeah, it's like
shtick.
he's the first one to have figured that out, and now can be the only one unless somebody would be like you're a copycat. You're just copying Edgar Wright. It's
So
kind of like
he figured
with
out the
like
shtick.
what was that?
He figured out his shtick, and now everybody's like, "Fuck, that's really good." Man, I can't steal it now, or else be called a
Or it's like with a
liar.
lot of what Tarantino does, like the quick pans and the quick zooms that he uses that are indicative of Sergio Leone and like that spaghetti western style.
Mm-hmm.
It's like only he can use them pretty much because it's his. It's everybody thinks it's just Tarantino's style of film. I know there's probably a few different directors that do use it and they've gotten away with it, but again, when you see it, you're like, oh, that feels a lot like a Tarantino film.
Yeah.
Um, I'd be interested in too. There's an element to which Edgar Wright is like this interesting postmodern example of a director,
Mm-hmm.
where his style is very indicative of like the aughts and a world in which technology and need for fast-paced stories are imperative.
He is
I'd be
a
interested.
good leftover of like the MTV generation,
Yeah,
where everything's very fast and loose, and it's a lot of like very in-your-face editing and structure and stuff like that from like the music videos and things like that of the late '90s or the
yeah, and
'90s.
I'd be interested in seeing because there's another movie that came out a few years ago that had this kind of similar style of like parodying the world tongue in cheek. Do you remember the movie Sorry to Bother You?
Oh, I remember. I remember seeing the trailers for it. I never got a chance to watch it.
Yeah, written and directed by Boots Riley. I'd be interested in comparing this to that, or in general, Edgar Wright's kind of like comedic view of the world to that, because I think there's an element to which both these directors kind
They're
of looked at the
smoking the
world
same. They're smoking the same grass, and they're walking the same road.
a little bit, but like there's like a hyper realistic awareness of what the world is that they
Mm.
then parody on screen. I don't know. I just thought about that a little bit with like a lot of the cartoonish portrayal of the world that Shaun is in. But I guess that's all I have to say about Shaun of the Dead.
That's
And
more or less what I brought into this. Yeah. So why
yeah,
don't
I
we?
guess we've beaten the undead horse.
So why don't we take a break on this one and get ready to see our next one at the Double Feature podcast with Dawn of the Dead right after this. Or this. No, this time we're actually going to cut. Okay, this one. This is the ad. Okay, this one.
Dean, I found a great way for us to do something cool and to make a little money on the side.
Great. I've been looking for a new place to put my money. What do you got?
No investment needed. In fact, it's super easy, and there's creation tools we can use to record our podcast right from the phone or computer.
Wait, why would you record a podcast on your phone? You want? Never mind. Where do I put my money for this?
I don't need any of your money. We can even get our podcast distributed to big streaming platforms like Spotify and Google Podcasts.
Oh, I get it now. We're talking big business here. Okay, so you're gonna need a lot of money from me. How much money are we talking here?
No, definitely don't need any of your money. In fact, we can make money from the podcast with no minimum listenership.
Okay, now I think I'm getting what you're going at here. We need to spend money to make money, so we're talking some big gains here. Big gains.
No, definitely no. I don't need any of your money. Just all we need to make a podcast right in one place.
Okay. So what you're telling me is that you're gonna need a pretty big check from me for this podcast. So do I just make it out to cash? Because it's no problem for me. I'll just write it up right now.
No, listen, Dean, just head over to anchor.fm and check it out. You'll see why Anchor is the best place for us to record, edit, and distribute our podcasts. And I definitely do not need any of your money.
Shut up and take my money. And welcome back to the Double Feature podcast. After that little break, which was kind of a long time.
It was a pretty long break, wasn't it?
Pretty
Dean?
long break, yeah. So everyone out there, in case I sound different or if David sounds different, it's because there was a issue with our recording of the second half of this episode. David, you want to inform the people about it at all, or?
Might be just some bad omens. We're now really running up against the end of the month, and the moon is in its final cycles before Halloween. And there's an election coming up, and there's some fires going on, and I don't know. There's probably just bad luck in the air.
Just a little bit. Just a little bit.
Yeah.
But yeah, so our second half of Dawn of the Dead got corrupted, so we are going to have to re-record it. But I think it actually might be a good thing, because I realized I had a lot more to say about the film after we walked away from it. So why don't we get started?
This is true.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
we had a whole dissertation of Dawn of the Dead when we talked about it the first time, so I'm kind of interested to see what else we pulled from it.
Right, and what I remember from our dissertation is that we loved the film.
Oh, very much so, yeah.
Yeah, we definitely did. We talked a bit about the simplicity of it, kind of, is from what I remember from it.
We talked a lot about George A. Romero, how he uses the camera and the sets.
Right, and particularly for me, it was that theme we fell on with, like, the kind of the consumerism thing.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sure we talked about it a bit in Shaun of the Dead, and this movie is certainly uncanny, and it
is prophetic in certain ways.
Yeah, prophetic is a good word to use.
You want to just
I guess if we
jump right in on this one?
Yeah, I mean, like, a little rundown of our plot is that we follow a couple, their former SWAT team.
Two of them are. What is it? Ken Foray and
Scott Reiniger.
Yeah, and Scott Reiniger. Those are the SWAT teams. Then you have the chopper pilot, who I think just works for the news station, and then his girlfriend or wife, and she's works at the news station, and they're all kind of got together, and they're gonna fly out of here and try and find a place to hunker down while the apocalypse happens.
The connection, even when I was watching it, the connection I think is pretty loose, but they happen to all get into a helicopter and make a getaway after the sting of an apartment building in which dwellers were not following martial rule of turning over people who have
turning over the sick. They were
just
doing the Bring Out Your Dead from Monty Python.
And not only that, but this is like we said prophetic, and no kidding, because it's literally more people just disregarding public health guidelines.
Yeah. Also, when it's the whole SWAT team that goes in on this, like, the projects building, and it's only black people in that building, and they just get blown away by these cops, and it gets real awkward, like, immediately. And you have the one wild cop who that starts it.
Oh yeah, that guy's going ham.
Oh man. So oddly enough, the most political movie we will be talking about leading up to this election is Dawn of the Dead, boys.
Yeah, it is kind of weird how oddly political this film becomes. I mean, I know Romero made sort of a racial statement with the first
with
film.
Night of the Living Dead.
Yeah, and that this is probably a continuation of that, albeit in a much more, let's say, not subtle way. I think the first one was quite subtle, but this one ends up being very,
I don't think subtlety is what you get from zombie movies.
Yeah, especially when you're barging through doors, shotgun blasting people,
Guys doing barrel
big
rolls.
Big fat SWAT man going off ham because he's probably juicing.
He's juicing?
He seemed whacked out, dude, so I wouldn't be surprised.
That's a good point, because I'm not sure if he is drugged out of his mind or if he's just snapped. I don't know. But
who knows? I mean, I feel like that's part of the introduction to the world, is that people are desensitized by the dystopia that this is all bringing on. I mean, it's quite concerning from the get-go.
I actually have a question. How deep into dystopia do you think things are when the movie starts? Because it does.
I think they're like people have talked a lot lately if we're in this timeline,
Yes.
timeline 336 or whatever we're in.
Yeah.
People have said a lot that we are somewhere near that, and I don't think so personally. I think, things are generally on the course that things have been on for the past, 80 to 100 years. Things have always happened in society that are weird. And I don't think we're really running into anything that's particularly out of the ordinary besides one kind of
Big
thing, maybe.
thing. Yeah.
But even then, it's like life still seems as familiar, 4 or 5 years ago as it does now, generally.
Mhm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I get what you mean. It's one of those things where it's like in this movie, the dystopia they're in, it's like that they're like they're descending into dystopia like a rock.
Absolutely, because this is a much different life for anybody who's not in the immediate bubble of dealing with the problem. Life is much different, and I think that's definitely what the apartment scene, if not the initial scene in the TV studio, points out, is like this is a rapidly increasing concern.
Like that, I think that's the joke that people say is 2020 isn't even an exciting apocalypse, it's just a boring dystopia where we have this global pandemic, there's all these weird terrorist attacks, all these like terrible things are going on, but it's just like people are stealing toilet paper. I don't get to run around in my Mad Max, souped up car in the desert and, live out the power fantasies. Like, this is just boring. Man, I thought the apocalypse would be way more fun.
I particularly think there's a point in you saying that we don't get to just go out and live loose cannon, I mean, I think that's what a lot of people are doing in this reality within the story, whereas like we certainly are not anywhere near that yet. Yeah, things are pretty high tension, but there have been high tension moments before.
Oh yeah.
And maybe it's just one of those pruning moments where society's kind of going through it, and then there will be a few years in which that's not happening, or who knows? I don't really know. It could all turn to shit tomorrow, and coronavirus could be a zombie apocalypse. I don't really know.
Dude, could you imagine if the coronavirus was just zombies? It was like a straight zombie apocalypse.
I'd be kind of interested to see if somebody can transform the zombie genre because we've had a few things. One thing that was actually pointed out to me recently was somebody pointed out the Santa Clarita Diet, that TV show with Drew Barrymore. And I think it's about her where she's a zombie and has to eat people as a part of her diet. And then it's like kind of a sitcom that's really raunchy and adult rated, but it was recommended to me recently, and I'm just like, well, why is zombie genres? Why is that the mode in which, even if it's been given good reviews, that somebody decided to transform that genre instead of like what actually has to do with the zombies, like the mode of transmission, the way it's dealt with, these kinds of things.
Because I'm pretty sure we are going to get a slew of zombie films that are, I'm gonna put my quotes up here, commentaries on the coronavirus outbreak. I can guarantee within the next 5 years, we're gonna just get a fat stack of zombie flicks that are commentaries on the coronavirus, on people in power during the coronavirus, on political parties in the coronavirus, about riots and fires and brimstone. Yeah. It's gonna happen, and they're gonna make money.
Oh, they're definitely gonna make money. I mean, Jesus Christ!
Just put The Rock in there, it'll be fine.
I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, I kind of feel like that kind of thing has been done before. The political, like, kind of, we're not going to acknowledge the public health or apocalyptic hazard that's coming. Like, what's that movie with Brandon Fraser that where he like predicts the world is about to go into a deep freeze, or like there's going to be all these natural disasters, but the politicians don't listen.
I don't think it's Brandon Fraser. I think you're thinking of Day After Tomorrow with Jake Gyllenhaal.
Is it
Day After Tomorrow? Well, that's not the one where he like psychically predicts it. It's like a scientist and he's trying to tell all the government officials like, oh, we got to change all this stuff because global warming is coming and it's going to usher us into a second ice age or whatever. And then it goes from like pretty normal.
Dennis Quaid. That's
yeah.
what
You're
I'm
thinking of Dennis Quaid, and it is Day After Tomorrow, right?
Yeah, it's the day
I'm
after
so
tomorrow.
good.
I don't know why I got Dennis Quaid and Brandon Fraser mixed
I
up.
don't even
But
think they look alike.
no, they don't. But they kind of, maybe it's their
It's
mannerism.
the haircut.
I don't really
They
know.
got the same haircut.
Maybe it's also like the typecasting. They seem like the kind of guys that would both be in that role. But neither here nor there. I think there's going to be a particular commentary on the people not listening to things. I think that's certainly been the narrative of this, is that it's people have felt that they're being infringed upon by being forced to follow public health guidelines in order to stop something that's kind of a public threat. But, you know, they don't want to do it because America, I got to have my hot dog. I got to have my freedom.
Freedom.
You mean I got to wear a mask when I go into A&PM just to get that $1 hot dog on a stick?
David, that was a little bit too good. Like, is there something we should know about?
Well, you know, I'm from stupid Hick, California, so I mean, I've been around it.
to let people know, there are in fact Hick counties in California.
Oh, absolutely.
You know,
Jesus. No kidding.
No one realizes that. It's like, no, they're there. They're just kind of small. But
yeah, if you want a little factoid, the county I'm from was actually where Breaking Bad was supposed to take place. It's just that California wouldn't give them enough of a tax break, so they moved it to Albuquerque.
Really?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Riverside County is like the meth capital of, if not this side of California, then the West Coast.
Yeah, honestly, doesn't surprise me when I think about it. Yeah.
There's a lot of open space out there, so it's like
you can set up a pretty decent lab and no one will know.
Yeah, and the Mojave Desert's out here. I mean, I know like New Mexico has a particular amount of open space, but then it's also not connected to the major cities. And
there's not a really good highway system to get out into like the desert.
Classic Southern California to be the middle point and the perfect spot for industry, and that even includes the drug trade.
Fact.
Just like Southern California to do that.
But on that note about people not taking things seriously, because we do actually have a thing in the movie that I remember kind of thinking was a little weird, and then it kind of clicked with me a little bit later, was when you see the juxtaposition of the city, and then when they leave the city and we see all the people on like the country, where they're having like basically like a barbecue.
Yeah, it's a lot of like National Guardsmen linking up with these hunters who probably live out there, and they are kind of having like
they're having a cookout.
A hooskow. Yeah.
They're like drinking, eating hot dogs, having a good old time, and they're just shooting zombies. And it's one of those things where I wonder if that was also a commentary about like city life versus rural life, where it's like problems that are big in the big cities aren't always a problem for like small town America, and there's a disconnect there in terms of like population and perception.
Because I think that's even true of, not again to call back to what's going on, but I mean, think about what's going on right now. I feel like half the reason that certain people aren't following things versus half the reason people are trying to get them to follow things is that it's just a difference in the environment. Whereas in rural America, you probably aren't running into so many people who have the virus, and or you aren't running into so many people, period.
I think there was one state, and it had its first case like 6 months into lockdown. Or like something like that, like like 4 months into lockdown, and it was like one of those middle America like states, like farming states. It might have been like Kansas,
like a North Dakota,
maybe even like a South Dakota. Like,
yeah,
honestly, any of the Dakotas, they need to end their war and just recombine to be one Dakota.
It would be nice. I mean, there would be nice if we had a lot of states that weren't just stealing each other's names, like Virginia and West Virginia. Why not just be like all Virginia?
Well, what happened to East Virginia? That's what happened. They had us in East Virginia, and Virginia ate it up, and West Virginia was like, nah, man, we can't do this anymore.
Well, remember all that talk about how California is supposed to fall off into the ocean?
Yeah, because of like all the earthquakes and the fault lines or whatever.
That's what happened.
Dude, I feel so bad for East Virginia.
Yeah.
Uh,
Rest
I
in
also
peace.
heard that California is supposed to separate into 2 states as well, but I don't know if
Oh my
that'll
God.
that'll
Yeah. I
never
remember when
happen.
that was on the ballot last year,
I
I think,
remember
or it was going
I
to be.
remember it
And
was
then people
like
were
people
like,
were talking about it. I don't know if it ever actually got onto a
it
ballot.
was proposed and then shot down, I think, once it was actually going to be on the ballot because everybody was like, no, this is actually ridiculous. I mean, it was supposed to be like 3 states or something like that. But
Yeah, I think that's actually right because I remember when I was young and they wanted to split it up like Northern California and Southern California. And then they were like, no, that'll just mess up like the population density. And then like, oh, we'll do it 3 states then. And
yeah.
let's be honest, if they wanted to do like population density, it would be like one state would just be LA County, like LA, Orange County, Anaheim. Like that would be one state. Then it would be like San Francisco, just like the San Francisco Bay Area. And then the rest of the state is one state. And then that would equal half the population of one of the other 2.
Yeah. Probably, yeah, honestly.
If I
I
had to
mean,
do
the
math.
San Diego metro area is probably the only other place that matters, but I don't even think that would measure up.
Yeah. Could you? I don't even know the Okay, we're getting on weird population and state.
We in the next few episodes, you'll notice that we've gotten on a few tangents, and it's
They're fun.
we're going to address the problem, people, but not until we get what we want, and you'll have to figure out what we
Exactly.
want. But yeah, I guess moving on that's an interesting scene is the juxtaposition between the metropolitan crisis and the happy-go-lucky party time that's going on in rural America. Particularly when the scene is odd for me because it's like, okay, I get it. It's a tonal shift. The rest of the movie tends to have this tonal shift for a while. It's like when we get closer to our main characters, because we really haven't been that close to them at this point.
No, we don't really know anything about them except for Peter and Roger, which are like the 2 SWAT officers. We know a little bit about them.
A little bit. They have kind of a meeting in the basement of the skyscraper that they are storming, and that's about it. We get,
like,
at first.
And then we know a little bit about Francine, and that's just she works at a TV station and she's a woman executive. And,
yeah, because she's the person we open on.
And Steven has no character. I don't even think they call him
basically
by his name for half the movie.
No, definitely not. And it's like that scene is exclamation point by this like car exploding, and then all of a sudden the music shifts, and then everybody's like kind of panicking and trying to get out of there, and it's like, why? It's a weird tonal shift. I don't know if it means that it's alerting zombies to the area, but seeing as they move at 2 miles an hour, this was actually something else I remember, is that we had an argument about why zombies kind of are stupid in certain situations.
Yes. So, because zombies are really, really good at representing like stuff in movies. Like they're really good just proxy. But as an actual threat to your well-being,
it just seems pretty...
Well, Romero zombies. We'll start with Romero zombies because like 28 Days Later zombies, where you get bit by a zombie and you turn into Usain Bolt and you just can like sprint for hours.
Yeah, or like the same thing I think I mentioned in World War Z, where it was just like they can pile on top of each other like a bunch of fire ants, and it just is odd. It's an interesting cinematic visual for like a blockbuster, but beyond that, it's just, I think I harped on it a little bit too much, I'll admit. I get it, it's just some zombies, but there is something to this where it's like, I get that they're decomposing, so why would they be able to all of a sudden be drafted into the NFL?
Like that's the thing with the Romero zombies and even the Shaun of the Dead zombies that we in the movie we talked about earlier. These zombies work when they are in mass, when there's just a bunch of them. But
yeah,
if we had zombies instead of coronavirus, I think we would have been out of lockdown in like 2 weeks and people would have just started shooting zombies on their way to work.
Right. I definitely believe that because, I mean, Jesus, that's been one of the hot button issues, right? That people need something to shoot at. And it would definitely give people something to shoot at, but it would also...
Oh my God.
I kind of feel like... You go ahead.
Okay. It would be a thing where we'd have the zombies in zombie outbreaks in like Texas, Montana, Florida. They're just shooting zombies on the way to work. And California and New York would be fighting for equal zombie protection. And
kind of like in Shaun of the Dead, honestly.
Yeah, because isn't that a thing in Shaun of the Dead where they just kind of like adopt the zombies as like labor?
Yeah, and it's kind of welcomed into society at large because they start to harp on the whole "there is still a person in there" thing, which is touched on a bit in this movie too. And that's actually the thing I think that fascinates me most about the genre is, the summary goes that they finally get to the shopping mall after running around the wilderness in rural America for a little bit.
Yeah.
And this is where most of the movie takes place, right? There's a lot of antics at first. It's pretty fun, and
it's Peter and Roger kind of screwing around in this big empty mall, which is a real mall, so it's kind of weird to see it so empty.
Yeah, I think you mentioned that they shot there at night, right? And then they had to like even shut down production at one point.
Yeah, so so they shot the whole movie. So anything inside the mall was shot at night. And the production went on, and then it came to the holiday season, and George Romero was like, yeah, no, I ain't paying money to have this shit taken down and put back up for the shoot. We'll just wait and start back in January when the Christmas decorations are down. So production closed down for like 2 or 3 months while they had all the Christmas decorations up. Yep.
Which is cool. I mean,
it's also
take a break.
Why thing not? Where you got to think about it, like this movie is weird because it's like super resource filmmaking, because George A. Romero had like not a lot of money to make this movie. He actually took a pay cut so he had final cut on this movie.
Yeah, I'm looking at the budget here on the Wikipedia page, and at 1.5 million. I don't know if that's adjusted for inflation at all, but yikes, you got a penny pinch on that one.
Yeah. I think that is adjusted for inflation, because I think the original budget was like $600,000.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like nowadays because I think about the most recent blockbuster level horror film that it was shot mostly in one location, but still had some things in it that would probably make it more expensive, is like Get Out. Mm-hmm. That would probably be something that they tried to do low budget, but still on a large scale.
I think
marketing release.
Invisible Man was one of those, because I think that one only cost like $5 million.
Yeah, and I think Get Out was around the same price tag. Both by Blumhouse, no surprise there, but I can't even imagine, like, I will say it's not also surprising because the zombie makeup in particular is a little noticeable, I mean, it's just some blue makeup on a face practically.
Yeah.
With some,
gore effects.
Like Halloween store level gore effects.
Which is really weird because what is it? Tim Savini? He does he did all the effects in this, and he is really famous for his special effects work. He did Friday the 13th, he did Dawn of the Dead, and all these movies. And he was a war photographer in Vietnam, and he based a lot of his gore effects on the stuff he saw in Vietnam because, yeah. And when you watch Dawn of the Dead, you can tell the makeup was a choice by George Romero to look goofy, because George Romero wanted a comic book feel to Dawn of the Dead as opposed to like a really like serious zombie feature. But then when you watch something like Day of the Dead, where Tim Savini had a lot more free reign to kind of do his gore effects, and it looks way, way different between those two movies. So right. I think the cartoony aspect of the zombies is intentional, but I don't know why.
I wouldn't be surprised too, because like the way they treat the zombies in this film, aside from like the science of everything, like the way they interact with them is particularly cartoonish, but in a good way. I think there's a level to which that Romero is acknowledging that we would be kind of cocky around them. I mean, if not certainly apparent in the cookout scene, then definitely in the way that Peter and Roger, right, are running around the mall, pushing them around.
Oh, or the truck scene.
Yeah, that too. And he's like, which is interesting because that's, I think, where that those two tones start to collide with each other, because obviously it's a turning point for the character Roger, but it's definitely a turning point in that his actual he I think is more indicative of that carefree attitude in dealing with the situation, whereas Peter is the one who is more serious about the goings on of trying to survive this.
Yeah, like it, because Roger seems like he's enjoying the apocalypse. Like he's like, oh, finally, you know, there's no responsibility. You know, he's playing cowboy. That's what's going on.
Literally, I mean, with the yippee-ki-yay he's doing in the truck scene.
Yippee-ki-yays, the shooting off and all that stuff. And Peter is treating this more like, well, I'm doing this for like survival. I don't really enjoy it, but I'm going to have to enjoy myself or I'm going to go crazy.
Yeah, and they do empathize with each other in that respect, and which makes them a great charismatic pair.
They were the
aside from all like
best parts of this movie. That relationship.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like to do this movie over again with like somebody like, well, obviously The Rock, I think.
Yeah, of course.
But then
you get The Rock, you get Kevin Hart, just make the zombie movie.
Kevin Hart would actually not be bad. Yeah, they do have some charisma together, or even like, I don't really know. I don't really know about anybody nowadays who has that cowboyish attitude.
You get Leo and Brad Pitt to be Peter and Roger in the Dawn of the Dead 2025 remake. You pick which one has been blackface. I'll leave that up to you.
Oh my god.
Margot Robbie plays Francine, and then Danny Trejo plays Steven.
That's a hell of a pairing there, because Danny Trejo and Margot Robbie would be canon, you know.
Oh yeah, well,
doing the do, as Dean would say.
Well, let's be honest here. It's Danny Trejo, and any woman, he could do it. I believe in the man.
Yeah,
but you know,
actually, you know who I think could really be pegged as like a good actor for Roger, and it's a little obscure to be paired then with The Rock. I know, but like, do you watch Glow?
Oh no, I have not. I've heard great things about it. I just haven't gotten around to watching it because I'm terrible.
There's a character on that show. Let me make sure I'm getting the name right. Played by Chris Lowell. He's like the rich kid on that show who finances it as a producer. I think he could have that type of way about him. It's kind of squirrely in that way. But squirrely is actually a really good way to describe Roger.
What if it's Paul Rudd?
Paul Rudd could be good. Those guys all those choices are kind of old though.
Yeah,
like they're guys in their 50s, and I feel
Paul
like
Rudd
Roger's
is in his 50s, and he looks like he's like 30.
Yeah, that's true. He still looks as good as the day he was born.
Legitimately, so because of Halloween, I'm like, oh, I'm gonna watch some horror movies, and I like saw, oh, Curse of Michael Myers. Oh wait, Paul Rudd's in this, and I turned the back of the box, and it's young Paul Rudd there. He's probably like, I don't know, in his 20s there. And I was like, wait a minute, and I picked up my copy of Ant-Man, and he has the same face in both of them, like he's making the same look at the camera.
He's built for time.
He is. It's ridiculous. It's him and Keanu Reeves. Keanu Reeves is a vampire. You know, fact. Just letting you know.
Interesting. He does look vampirish.
That's why he was cast in Dracula.
Exactly.
Coppola knew. Cast method.
So I guess from the truck scene, that's when that tonal shift happens. And we start to get into that point I was going to make earlier is like, that's when a lot of the questions are starting to be raised about like, when you turn into a zombie, are you still human? Which is an interesting thing for him to bring up to kind of bring it back down to earth. It starts with Roger turning, right? And he goes through this whole like 5-step
stages of grief
with emphasis on rage, probably. He has like these weird battlefield flashbacks to like, did we get him, sir? Oh, did we get him? It was particularly like overacted, but I kind of like it.
I think it works for him though, because Roger throughout the movie is once he gets into the mall, he is dialed up to 11.
Yeah, he's a kid in a candy store.
Yeah, and then when he gets back, he's just like, oh, mission accomplished, we did it. And then when they start taking him through the mall and all this other stuff, and you start seeing it's like, oh, he is degrading really quickly, and it is getting a little sad. And then, okay, when Roger and Peter were saying goodbye to each other in Roger's room, did it get to you? Did you feel bad?
It's a very dark scene. There's a couple of these that are particularly dark, and this is one of them. Particularly when they all tend to happen in this room too. Now that I think about it, but it's like there's a mixture of grief and fear, and it's odd. It's an odd emotion to run into, and I think it's particularly what Romero is trying to point out is that this is the folly of Roger. You didn't take it seriously, and now you'll have to face it, just like everybody else who didn't take it seriously. And Peter is kind of left to this whole thing where I think it kind of snaps something inside of him, as a later plot point will point out. I particularly like this sequence then when the bikers finally show up.
Oh yeah,
and they've fought them off, and Steven, the helicopter man, is trying to get back to the safe room, but he's kind of caught in the elevator. Well, not kind of caught. He is
and all
caught.
The zombies get to him.
Yeah, and then so he turns, but he finds his way back to the safe room, right?
Yeah, even though they boarded it up and hid the doorway, he still remembers from when he was alive that it's a fake passage.
Exactly, and I like that because it's like a more literal version of, are they still who they are when they turn? Because there would literally be no way for him to find it without the memory of it. So, and even with his behavior once he gets into the room is particularly like familiar in a certain way.
I think that's a point that Peter makes where they're asked, why do they come here? And he's like, memory, they know they want to be here, they just don't know why, which is a double, metaphor for why do you go to the mall to shop when you don't actually need anything? Well, I just go to shop. You're not looking for anything, you just want to spend money. It's that whole consumerism thing. But that is kind of interesting for the zombies in this movie. Is that an argument that like you're still you when you're dead? Like, is that like a soul argument?
I even think it's beyond that, where it's like, it's kind of coincidental, but I went to IKEA today. That is also why I've been yawning the whole podcast, is because I had to build furniture and I'm worn the fuck out.
Powerlifting, cabinets all day.
Yeah. Or bookcases, really. Why? Which also, it's like, why do they make all the boxes way too long?
I had to do the same thing when I had to build one of my desks, and the box was ridiculous. I couldn't carry it by myself, and then I cracked it open, and I was like, there's barely anything in here. Like the desktop is like, what's going on here? Like, who packed this? But besides the point, I'm going on tangent.
Well, besides the point, there was a woman near us in the store who, she got there and she didn't buy any furniture, right? Which is normally what you go to for IKEA. I mean, You're not just going there to buy what she bought, which is like she bought a welcome mat, some odds and ends. And the whole time when she was shopping, I kind of observed her and she was like looking around at everything, and it just kind of felt like she was there to get something to put in her house, you know?
Yeah.
But not like as a furnishing, just as like oh, that's new. And it really is like kind of weird how it felt like discussing this again brought up this idea that are you even technically you when you're doing things out in the normal world? Like, are you just convinced by things like consumerism to be something that you know that you shouldn't, but you're for some reason drawn to it anyway?
Is it one of those things
such as buying 2 welcome mats?
Actually, that's actually kind of interesting. Is it a thing where when you go into a store just to go into a store and look around, like you're basically just being a zombie. You're just wandering around. Like if you went, like, like say we went to the mall, we're probably not going to buy anything. I mean, I know like when I was in high school, because there is nothing to do around where I live, I would go to the mall and just like hang out all day. But thinking back on it, like I probably looked like a zombie in this movie. I would just kind of like wander around, look at stores, go get something to eat, and maybe shoot the shit with my friends. And that was like kind of what you did on, like a random day if you had nothing to do.
Yeah, and that's another interesting question is that because particularly the teen thing brings up like this idea of belonging. And I think that's why we all go to the mall when we're a teen, is it just kind of feels like something we should do as teenagers. And maybe that's also what's going on with the zombies, is maybe they're also following each other's behavior because they don't have that anymore. Is it a desire to eat flesh, or is it just that we all coincidentally are eating flesh, so it's like a learned behavior? Fascinating. I think it's not just fascinating by bringing up the point, but it also kind of deepens the terror that brings on the idea of zombies. It's not just about flesh eating; it's about all these ideas of mortality and psychology, and personality, and all these things that are brought up. Yeah, as like a way to criticize consumerism and capitalism, all these things, but then a really juxtaposed version of the story against this, what is, I think we described it when we were talking about it last, a blockbuster movie. I mean, really, when you think about it, this is practically just an action movie.
Oh, yeah. If we're being honest, Dawn of the Dead it's a horror movie because it's a zombie flick, and all zombie flicks are horror movies, but at the heart of it, it's kind of a, shoot 'em up action movie with some like dark comedy bits thrown in. It's right up George A. Romero's alley. That's kind of the movies he makes. Or
yeah,
make me
and I think there's too like a particular. It sucks because I don't want to laugh at it, because the particular scene starts off super dark. When Peter is about to sacrifice himself, is I guess a good way to put it. And then all of a sudden the cowboy music kicks in and he just fucking Rambos it out.
Oh
of there
my
to
god,
get back to
yes.
the helicopter.
That is one of the best scenes. Oh, it's so good. Peter's there and he's just like, I don't want to go on. Don't worry, Francine. You go up and get a helicopter. I'll hold him off. And he's just sitting there in the room and he's about to just like shoot himself in the head, and then something rallies in him. And then he just starts kicking all the ass. Like,
yeah.
The best is when you see, what is it, Ken Fore's like 6'7" ass doing like a roundhouse kick on somebody. You haven't lived until you've seen that, because it's a bad kick.
Or just in general, like he just starts throwing knuckles at everybody, and it's like, okay. A second ago, you seemed pretty concerned that they were there.
A second ago, you were about to just end it. You were just like, I'm done.
Well, the spirit moved him. I don't know.
It's
or maybe he just finally realized it's like, oh wait, Steven's gone. Francine's gonna be pretty lonely.
He might have been like, yo, like, that's some nice ass up there, and she can't get pregnant. She's already pregnant. I got a freebie on that one.
Yeah. Oh, Peter.
I mean, like,
But that's the hedonism that's probably going on in this post-apocalyptic world. I mean, I'm surprised that this movie didn't get into more of the hedonism thing, but maybe that's just not what Romero was trying to focus on.
okay, so because the only people that are alive in the mall, it's 3 dudes and a woman, and they're there for a while. Like, how long do you think they're actually in the mall?
That's a good question. Watching the movie, it doesn't even seem like a week in my mind.
Really? No, I think they were in there for like months. Like, from my perspective, because it's like they set up their living area, and we get to see them go from the fear of survival and setting up in necessities, and then it gets into like that leisurely everyday stuff, and then we got to them kind of cracking under the pressure of the loneliness kind of thing.
Yeah, maybe I'll cop to that and maybe there's something in that is particularly, it only feels like a week in the story, but that's also probably what the characters are experiencing, is they're like, shit, where'd all the time go? We've been inside forever, and it just kind of feels like a meshed together timeline without day or night.
Hashtag COVID.
Ah, well,
there you go. Again, commentary all over the place. But the point I'm getting to be a little crass, as one is tend to do. Do you think Francine is taking him on 2 at a time?
That's a tough question, because
if they're in there for months,
it does leave one guy out, and Francine doesn't seem like that type of person. I think
probably
she's
not. But I mean, like, literally, they're like the last humans on Earth. They haven't seen any television. They have no communication with the outside world. She is pregnant when they get there with Steven's baby, I think. I don't know.
Yeah.
Is it actually his kid? Yeah.
It seems like it anyway.
He's the one who's like put himself in that father figure role for the kid, so I'm assuming it's his kid. But do you think like Peter and Roger maybe kind of got a little lonely, and Steven was like, we're kind of, and Francine's like, Peter looks pretty fly in them Adidas kicks, so.
He does look fine. That's what I'm thinking, though, is that I don't know if she'd do the whole hedonistic, let's go ham wow with all this, but
probably not.
I think she might play, women are a little bit more methodical than that. Maybe she's pulling a little bit more romance behind Steven's back, Steven is a particularly bland individual. I mean, like we said, his character is just about that he's a helicopter guy.
Yeah, which I don't want to be mean to the actor, because he's good. Like, I find it enjoyable, but
Romero didn't give the character anything. So.
Yeah, it's like, you're a helicopter pilot, you're kind of a doofus, and yeah, roll with it. Go.
Yeah.
Look like a cowboy.
Yeah,
that's your stick.
Peter is a deep, thoughtful, serious yet kind, looking fly in his Adidas, playing racquetball ass. He's prime meat. He's prime cut. And Roger, I feel like is a no-go, because he's particularly enamored with the playtime of everything. So
Roger would be the one like loudly masturbating in the Victoria's Secret, just to try and get a rise out of the zombies watching him through the window.
Yeah, or at the very least, he's one getting like a boy cucked with everything, where he's like, "Oh wow, they went and got me a fire truck. Oh, I'm gonna go run this around the mall." And then it's just really to get him out of the safe room for 45 minutes.
God. Again, sorry to be crass, but that's the weird things that go through my head when I'm watching these kind of like post-apocalyptic zombie movies on a long enough timeline. Like, men, women, I understand their standards, their reason, but let's be honest here. On a long enough timeline, you'll figure something out. You will justify the situation.
Have to be asked, Dean. They do, and particularly the biker gang is all over the place. They're doing drugs. They're fucking. They're sucking. They're
shooting up everything.
That's what the biker gangs are. But it's like, it's kind of like that comment we made in the Halloween episode about Norman Bates. We always have to ask the difficult questions, and one difficult question I have to ask, in particular, is what's the food situation like? Because we pretty much run the gambit of what this movie is, except for that. And I know that it does get particularly bad toward the end, but that's one thing that I've always wondered about, like an apocalyptic situation, is would I really give much of a care to live if the food just got increasingly worse in quality?
If it went from it's like, oh, I could reasonably like still get like canned food, and then it went down to you kind of like cooking like possums and rats.
Yeah,
is it
it's
around
just after a
possum
while,
and
I'm
rats,
like,
you take the knee and you're just like, I'm out of this apocalypse. Zombies, come on in.
yeah, or like think about too. We live in a society in which there are gourmet grilled cheese restaurants. I mean, we got, especially in LA, the it's wide open, you know. And I don't know if I'd be able to go back to
Spam sandwiches.
I
and
know
ramen.
Yeah, I know I'd probably have to give it the vegan thing, and that's, I get it. It's kind of a special situation.
No, you would be part of like that group in Seattle who they started their own city, and people were sending them supplies to keep the thing going, and they would send the food back and ask for vegan food. Did you hear about that?
There'd probably just be some like bean commune out in the hills somewhere where they're just growing green beans, and it would just be like, this is our life now. We just live off green beans.
This is the vegan life. This is the vegan apocalypse, people. Avocado toast for everyone.
No, I don't particularly think that would.
But yeah,
I don't know. It depresses me which is weird because of all the depressing things that happen in this movie. That's the one thing where I'm like, or it's like kind of like, to bring it back to COVID. It's kind of like this whole thing where people say that you lose your taste and your smell when you get COVID sometimes. Mm-hmm. And it's like, I think I could do the smell thing. Like I could probably live solidly without that, but taste,
David,
I don't know if I could do that.
David is the pickiest person I've ever met. He's just like, look,
I'm not picky.
You're like, I know I'm vegan, but it's got to taste. It still has to taste like real pizza when I eat it, or it just doesn't happen.
Imagine living in a world in which you can't put hot sauce on things and it wouldn't matter.
Bro, you gave me a 45-minute speech about pizza grease, and you're just like, look, there's certain kinds of grease on food, and pizza grease you cannot replicate. All right? It's a natural.
Well, you can't. You cannot do it. We haven't gotten close anyway with any of the places we've gone to. Maybe actually Whole Foods is a pretty good substitute. I will say that their pizzas, the vegan ones in particular, are the closest I probably had, but that's beside the point.
But I think if them in the mall, I think they're still getting like pretty decent food selection. But yeah, the bikers they're just robbing 7-Elevens, right?
Who knows what the bikers are into? They might not even eat for days because meth can do that to you. I mean, who knows? Or really, it's just like, I don't even understand like the whole idea of. So this is actually a thing that can connect us back to the movie. The biker thing seems kind of planted. Well, it does seem like it's a kind of thing where, yeah, it's another question that has to be addressed. This is basically a long movie of just like bringing up questions and then addressing them.
Yeah, like in this situation, what would happen if X happened? Well, the cause and effect, why it would happen.
Yeah, and which is fine. It actually makes the movie quite enjoyable, I think. But the biker gang triggers the climax of the film, and it feels like a little out of nowhere. And the movie does feel like it lulls a little bit because of the fact that it's not necessarily leading to an end point until the biker gang thing.
Yeah, and it's also kind of a long movie, and it's a little...
Yeah, it's about 7 minutes over 2 hours.
Yeah, and to put it lightly, it's methodical about its pacing. It has its action beats, and then it gets slow, and it lets you like live with the characters for a little bit, and then you have some montages in there, but it's very methodical with how it's going about. But I get what you mean about the biker showing up, and it feels like Romero had to get to Act 3 somehow.
Yeah, yeah, a little bit, and I don't know. It's one of those things where I feel like you could have planted something in there earlier in the movie, called back to it somehow, because you're dealing with this like wide breadth of society with out at all addressing the hedonism until the end. And maybe it could have been like, I get it. Maybe it was a little bit there in the cookout scene, but it wasn't pronounced enough for me to be like, oh, that's a callback to the beginning of the movie.
You know what would have been interesting if the bikers at the end, we saw them as the like happy-go-lucky like country people at the beginning of the movie. I wonder, that would have been like a really
Maybe
good
so.
Dichotomy there. Because that would have been like, oh yeah, this affected your city first and it affected you way worse, and the people in the rural areas didn't really care. But when it finally got to you, you ended up in the same place as everybody else.
Maybe so. Or it's like if they could somehow make a point about, because like the I guess the end of the movie is that it's better to go on living than to give up. And maybe that's some point they could have brought up in the biker gang bit, where it's like one of them, they realized they've all been killed because the biker gangs they were all going after the group, and then it got Steven killed, and the girl and Francine and Peter are just like, we got to get out of here. But there's one guy in the biker gang who's like, I'm about to get messed up by the zombies, and Peter is like, we can't do that to him. You know, like we have to go on and try and save everyone we can, because otherwise
life
we're no
is
different
precious,
from them,
kind of thing,
or something like that. I don't know. And maybe it's also making it a little bit too serious too, because you know
that last action scene where Peter's drop kicking zombies is pretty awesome.
Yeah, or like it's just in general badass sequence. But I don't know. I mean,
okay.
It the bow's tied fairly. I'll give it that.
It's tied pretty well. I think the movie actually works really well. Like, and the story, it really is ask a question, answer it. How does this affect the rest of the story? And how does this affect the characters? And it really does work that way. And it's a very interesting narrative way to go in the guise of this kind of like horror movie action genre film. But I do have a question, borderline not related, but I kind of want to know, because when we were talking about the bikers and the rural people in the group, what's the story of the bikers and how did they get there, and what happened to the rural people? If this is your deleted scene, what crazy nonsense can you come up with that they did? To the rural people, it's like, oh, we killed all them zombies like months ago, and we just been living. It's fine.
Yeah, I kind of feel like there's an element to which it's here's actually a way it could even connect the two. Maybe it's the bleeding of metropolitan life into the rural life of America, in that like the low life scum of the cities gets out into the country and they feel a little bit more open and free to do things. And that along the way, then people who are just living out in rural America, biding their time, get hooked on the drugs and sex of it all, and the group grows into this like cultish, which is how it's presented, in this cultish, nihilistic group.
I thought we were gonna go way different with that, but actually, yeah, that's probably what's going on here if we're going thematically. Because
yeah, I mean, if I had to give it a deleted scene, maybe it's one of those things where it's just about it's like a group of pirates pillaging the land, which is kind of what they're doing with them all. But then they like just keep breaking into farmsteads, and
that is kind of.
And
I wonder, it's like, what was the. So the bikers thing is that they're just like nomadic tribesmen just running across the state, kind of just killing zombies and going and going and going. And the rural people were just like, we're just going to hunker down and wait this out and, use our copious amounts of guns and whatever, and we'll just ride this out. And with Peter's group, they were like, oh, we're going to leave and we're going to find a stronghold and just hold up here. And it's kind of interesting because that's like 3 different stages of people's. I'm gonna put my quotes up. Zombie escape plan, or a zombie apocalypse plan that people fantasize about, but let's be honest, you had your chance to implement your zombie plan and you guys kind of punted that one. But
yeah,
because that's the thing, people are like, oh, what would you do in a zombie apocalypse? Because that's what you ask in a comic book store at like 10 o'clock because you're bored. It's like, oh, I would just, get on my bike. Me and my boys would go out and we'd just run across America and be Mad Max and shooting zombies and doing cool stuff. And then it's the people who are like, oh, I'd probably just like, I don't know, lock up in my house and get on my roof and like try and communicate with the neighbors and just like wait it out. And then some people are like, oh, I'm going to the Costco. I'm gonna find like the shelves that are like 16 feet high and get a couch up there. I'm gonna live up there like a little apartment. It's kind of interesting that we kind of have 3 representations of the really dumb nerd conversations people would have after this movie. But, again, I can make a bunch more observations of this movie that are just really weird that I find interesting because this movie is really interesting and there's a lot of little bits about it.
It's quite layered, yeah. It's kind of weird because now we're transitioning to a part of the podcast where obviously we're supposed to compare the 2 movies.
Yeah.
And this might be a little disjointed because of the nature of our error, but we're gonna try anyway.
We are
to put things together
because we do still remember our Shaun of the Dead stuff. We still know what we were going on about, and I think Shaun of the Dead works really well, as you said, as a genre mashup where it's a breakup movie and a zombie film, or it's a breakup movie with a zombie film skin over it, and the editing of Edgar Wright works really well in that movie, and the comedy still holds up. And then we have Dawn of the Dead, which is kind of the Mac Daddy of zombie flicks, and there's a lot of themes and dark humor and stuff like that, and it's a lot more raw filmmaking, so that's kind of where we have to decide which we like more. Do we like that kind of like clean, fast, tight work in Shaun of the Dead, or do we like this kind of sprawling, kind of big picture theme movie with Dawn of the Dead?
I can't remember if this was my recommendation, but I think I settled on recommending Shaun of the Dead, but that I liked Dawn of the Dead more. But that's certainly how I feel at the present moment, is that Shaun of the Dead, I like in theory that it's a better way to give somebody the zombie genre because it's in a comedy, it's the breakup movie, it's these nice characters that you like following around. It's a compelling story. It's a little bit more relatable. It's not quite scary.
It's a quicker cut,
but still has elements of it. Whereas Dawn of the Dead, I actually deeply appreciate this one much more after giving it some time. And I even probably enjoyed it a little bit more. Like, I got into the fun of some of the, Rogers cowboyish antics, and
that death scene still kind of gets you.
Yeah, there's like these deeply emotional, dark points in this film that are really well-timed tonal shifts. Or I don't even want to say well-timed. It's that they're so natural in the way that they happen. The movie is, kind of long-winded, but I think it gives it enough room to make all of its twists. Aside from the whiplash ending, but beside the point, it's like I don't know. I'm kind of in a wash with this one in recommending one, whereas I really like the other. But I think ultimately it's that I think Dawn of the Dead might be a little harsh to the average viewer.
Yeah, because
if you're into horror films, obviously go for Dawn of the Dead. But
yeah, because I think that's the thing where I would say more people should be watching the original Dawn of the Dead. I think that's probably would be my recommendation is more people need to watch Dawn of the Dead, but Shaun of the Dead you will probably find a easier watch, and you would probably have a good laugh at it, but
Right.
you should really be watching Dawn of the Dead. And that's the
fair.
thing. Like I want to recommend Dawn of the Dead. I want to just say the better movie is Dawn of the Dead. You should go watch it. You don't really need to watch Shaun of the Dead for this little back and forth here. But like Shaun of the Dead's like still really good. It's just like a different brand of zombie flick. And it's like it's hard to compare them because they're both zombie movies, but they're not both the same. It's not like other movies we've done before where they're like, what is it? I Know What You Did Last Summer and Urban Legends, where they're basically the same movie, more or less. Like they could almost use the same plot.
Yeah, and I get it. These are also on two different timelines of the genre, whereas one was, even though it was 10 years after the onset of it, still fairly new.
It was still setting the rules of like zombie flicks.
Yeah, it was setting it on a mass scale, that's for sure. And then Shaun of the Dead is at the tail end where, we're getting The Walking Dead in a few years and it'll just be like tired reboots of the genre. So let's spoof it until, and thankfully they do it in a way that is actually, I would certainly take it as like, take Shaun of the Dead as a lesson in parody, in that you don't have to just make fun of it. You can actually notice certain things about the genre that are useful as metaphor.
It's also a thing where it feels like Edgar Wright sincerely enjoys and likes zombie films, and he's not making a satire of something he finds stupid. He's making it something he finds cool and then putting a good story around it, and he's making fun of something he loves.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny that we're talking about this too, because we've been announcing it forever, but we'll actually be coming out with a video soon that kind of touches this subject of, properly parodying a genre and then improperly doing it. Yeah. Based on two movies that we mentioned that we have reviewed before. And I think this is an interesting lesson too, is that if you're into film, I don't know how many of our potential viewers are technically looking to get educated when watching any of these movies, but I think you can get a little bit more of an education out of Shaun of the Dead and its use of story versus genre versus visuals versus et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
Whereas, Dawn of the Dead is methodologically like, let's just kind of do what we think is the story, and then we'll cut it together for 2 hours and then come out with something that's surprisingly badass.
Like that is the thing about Dawn of the Dead. Everything we know about it, it should not work, and it works great.
Oh yeah, that's particularly what's interesting, is that it really shouldn't work in theory. I mean, the main characters are loose. There's not a whole lot of backstory to them. There's not really an inciting incident to the movie. I guess you could say stealing the helicopter might be.
The plot is basically things happen, lol.
Yeah, action-based, which is good for movies, but still there's not really a direction.
There's the only goal is to not die, which is like baseline goal for people.
Yeah. A lot of things that in theory shouldn't work in filmmaking end up working, which I think Romero is probably totally under the control of. I don't think he would ever, need to be wary of that.
Yeah.
Him being probably one of the greatest directors to ever live. But
he's for the films he made for like Night of the Living Dead, Dawn of the Dead, Day of the Dead, The Crazies, like or Creepshow, he's a really good director that it's really odd not many people talk about him.
Yeah. I don't know. I feel like he's like, you're right. Not a lot of people talk about him, but he's talked about in the proper circles. Maybe with like diminishing frequency, which is not good. He definitely needs to stay apart. I would say he's as prolific to the horror genre as somebody like a John Carpenter or Alfred Hitchcock, and or a Wes Craven even. It's like those. If you were to make your like
best horror directors,
your horror director Mount Rushmore, I think that's a pretty good pair of four to put together.
Actually, Horror Mountain, Mount Rushmore? Because definitely George Romero's on there and Alfred Hitchcock is on there, even though he made like thrillers, but like the guy invented the slasher genre with Psycho.
It's like putting George Washington, and then I have no idea exactly who's on the on Mount Rushmore. So I'm think Thomas Jefferson's on there.
George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Abraham Lincoln, and Teddy Roosevelt.
Yeah, so that kind of makes sense. I mean, like George Romero feels like the Thomas Jefferson, and then somebody like John Carpenter is like the probably the Abraham Lincoln. And then Wes Craven is Teddy Roosevelt, who just kind of took it, did something good, and then immediately started to be like, I don't know, let's just do some wacky shit.
He's like, yeah, I know I made one of the most iconic slasher villains of all time, but fuck it.
I wanted to sell toys.
So I found this out and this blew my mind because I thought Wes Craven directed every Nightmare on Elm Street movie. He only directed like the first one. All the other ones were other directors, but he still like owned the rights to them, so he was like a producer. And I was like, bruh, you read the script for Nightmare on Elm Street 4 and that got a pass. How much coke were you doing in the 90s? I need to know.
Enough to warrant a money grab, you know. I mean, you got to refill sometime.
I guess.
Yeah.
Huh.
But
yeah.
I don't know.
So that's probably where we kind of end up. Dawn of the Dead, you appreciate it. It's like a nice fine wine, but sometimes wine just don't satisfy, so you gotta give it to Shaun of the Dead this week.
Yeah, you know, you need that dessert wine. There's a little bit of sweetness to it.
Just a little bit of sweetness, a little bit of heartfelt to it.
Yeah. But I like that. I think that's a good place to come to consensus on and wrap things up on this
very strange recording of the double feature.
Yeah. Curse of the Corrupted File for Halloween. There you go. But all that aside, Dean, why don't we let the people know
where they can find us? Well, they wanted to find us. They can follow us on Instagram. That is the _feature podcast. You can find us there. We post stuff. We post stuff in our stories. We talk about movies, things that are coming out, so on and so forth. You can also find us on our YouTube channel, which is
In the Frame.
Yes, which you run, and I keep messing up the name of the channel when I have to tell people. But yeah,
that's fine.
I know. But because for some reason I call it Into the Frame and not In the Frame, and I'm like, we're not a 90s action movie yet.
Well, we'll get one of these
one day. But yeah,
one day.
And if you go there, you can also find the other podcast we do, which is Too Obscure for TV.
Right. By this time, we'll have we did release that first episode, which I'm pretty excited about because we got some more episodes of that coming soon that I'm very excited about because we're going to do some interesting things on that show.
Yes, and we are also going to be putting out a few more little side pieces on the YouTube channel, kind of get more interesting stuff going on.
We've announced a few over the ends of these podcasts for a while, but they are actually in production. We're actually moving on them, and they should be coming out very, very soon. So keep an eye out.
And if you like me, and maybe you don't like me, but you kind of want to just listen to me, you can listen to me also on the Film Club podcast, which I do with our lovely marketing director person who is my girlfriend. I gave her a real title, so she's more than Instagram
executive
person.
of telling people about us.
Exactly, executive of telling people about us. I'll put it like that. I do a podcast with her. It's fun, and that's my shameless plugs. David, would you like to shamelessly plug anything?
I need to shamelessly plug my mouth with dinner if that's if that's a shame. I don't have anything to plug right now, but actually I'll have some things coming up soon. So thank you for reminding me.
No worries. All right. Well, David, what do you got?
No, I mean I'll do it soon, but not now. I think.
No, I mean like what do you got for next week?
Oh, Jesus, this is gonna be a nightmare.
Yeah.
Conveniently, it is going to be a nightmare. It'll actually be the last Halloween episode that we'll have for the month of Halloween. It's sad, but probably a relief for some people that don't really like the horror movies and have been awake the entire month. We're going to be going over some real good classics, some good isolation horror stories.
Actually,
That'll
our
be-
favorites too.
Yeah, actually, they are chosen to be our favorites. The isolation horror was just a coincidence, but they are The Thing and The Shining.
2 movies that start with the obviously a coincidence. But yeah,
Look for the
look
clues.
for the clues. There's a conspiracy here.
Yeah. But until then, watch those movies and come see us next week. Until next week, Dean.
Peace. See you next week.
See you then.